Hello, I'm Dr. Joanne Powell. I'm a university lecturer in psychology, and in today's short session, I'm going to talk to you about what makes for a good dissertation project. Much of the guidance here is generic across undergraduate and master's level dissertations, but there are a few differences. Let's consider all stages of the research cycle to remind ourselves of what a project will in fact involve. The first stage is to develop your research question. Here you're wanting to develop a research question which is also informed by the existing literature, and this is why we often move between this stage and the next stage of the cycle, which is to explore the existing literature. So we have an initial idea, we look to the literature, and then perhaps we move back to develop and refine the research question, but always with reference to that literature. Then we move on to the study design. Here, we need to consider all aspects of the design of the study, including the methodologies that are going to be used, and who our participants are going to be, and how many we'll need, etc. This will undoubtedly also be informed by what we have read around the topic. By this point, we should also have considered other key questions such as the feasibility of the study and whether we have the resources needed to carry out the project. We then need to obtain ethical approval for the study we want to perform. This can be one of the biggest challenges in itself. Once ethical approval is obtained, we can begin data collection. Once we've obtained our data, which is often what feels like the biggest element of the study, we can go on to analyse and interpret the data. And finally, we'll begin writing up that report, including our findings and what we have done, and what this means in relation to that literature. So that's the research cycle in a nutshell. So what makes a good project? The first key ingredient is its theoretical underpinnings. The project should be rooted in existing psychological literature. It's true you cannot write a worthwhile introduction or discussion if there is little past research or theory to refer to. The second ingredient surrounds novelty, which is whether it is capable of adding something new to the literature. A key point to note here is that for an undergraduate dissertation, the project does not have to be groundbreaking or novel, but you do need a clear rationale for it. Dissertation projects at a higher level of study, for instance master's level dissertations, may require some element of novelty, and so you have to look at the programme guidelines there. Thirdly, and very importantly, is the viability of the project. The project should be achievable and realistic. You should be aiming to do a project which is achievable within the time frame that you have, the resources that you have, and the population that you have access to. You may be passionate about a topic, but do you have the time, resources, ethical clearance and/or access to the participants in order to do that? Another key ingredient to make a good project is capability. You need to be doing something that you understand. Some topic areas may be associated with very complicated theories that you might struggle to write about in a clear and concise manner, which will lose you marks when it comes to the actual marking of the report. It's better to understand a project and to undertake a project that you can fully grasp. The final desirable ingredient here Note that the preceding four are all essential. This last one is desirable. And this is the passion for the project. So though it's not a requirement, it's certainly useful to have at least an interest in the area that you'll be studying, as you will be spending much of your time reading around the area. So it is always helpful to embark upon a project that you have some passion for, or at the very least, some interest in. So selecting a topic. Typically, in practice, there are 4 approaches to selecting a topic. Firstly, the topic may be chosen because it interests you from your personal life. This is normally something that you can be quite passionate about. However, it is key not to let your own opinions bias your study. So sometimes it's not always a good thing to do something that you're particularly opinionated about. Another approach, which is very common, is that the topic interested you on the course that you've been studying. So this is a good approach to take, as it'll be an area that you are familiar with from an academic standpoint. But remember that modules often introduce you to the classic issues, and you really ought to familiarise yourself with the recent developments in the area, if that's not something that's already been covered in that particular module. You might also select a topic which is considered to be a hot topic in an area using search facilities and reading the latest issues of scientific journals. Finally, you might like to look at research happening in your own department to help guide you, and obviously speak with your supervisor who can provide you with some much important advice. But over everything else, make sure you meet your course criteria, the module objectives, when you choose a topic. Often the area that is of interest initially starts off being very broad or general, and we need to narrow it down to a very focused and specific research question. We can do this using a funnel strategy, where we take a broad category and become more specific within the area. So for example, we can take the case of language. Language is a vast area, so we need to be more specific, and we can narrow this further to language acquisition, and then to a slightly more specified category, in this case bilingualism. So we might want to focus on bilingualism in terms of the area, that vast area of language acquisition. However, this is also rather broad, particularly given the number of languages in the world. So we would focus on a particular type here. We're interested in Welsh English speakers. Then we should have a target population that we're interested in. So for instance, whether it's adults, adolescents or children. In this case, we decide to focus on children. And then we get a lot more specific. We want to focus on children with a Welsh and an English parent. Finally, we come up with the following research area: bilingual Welsh-English children's acquisition of vocabulary and reading, the effect of parents' active contribution. Okay, so this can be quite a common approach. It can be quite useful in helping us to define what it is that we want to do, because quite often we can start with a very broad area that we're interested in, whether it be obesity or mental health, or in this case language, and we have to focus in on the specific area or research question that we want to tackle. Now, it's recommended that you establish contact with your supervisor early and begin discussing your potential projects. Read a lot around the areas you're interested in. You'll work with your supervisor to develop a project. The dissertation is the most individualised module, as both student and staff bring to it their own unique experiences and personalities, and for the student, their own personal circumstances, such as their interests, goals, and time commitments to the project. Therefore, your experience of a dissertation module will be unique. And we ask that you keep this in mind throughout the dissertation. Okay, there can be quite big difficulties in comparing yourself too much to others when the experience is so unique. So you're not trying to develop a project around your supervisor's expertise. This should be a project that you are interested in doing. Though there are practicalities to take into account, for instance, if the project requires specific expert input, normally around the methodological approach. So for instance, whether you are using one of our available technologies such as eye tracking equipment, TMS, EEG, or whether it depends on a certain qualitative approach. If your supervisor cannot provide this, this is something that would need to be discussed and taken into account when developing the project. So the development of the project can involve a series of iterations and going back to the drawing board if certain conditions can't be met. So for instance, if you need heightened ethical approval, such as your institutional ethical approval, you might have to go back to the drawing board because it just might not be a feasible project for you to be able to do in the time span that you have in order to complete this dissertation project, this dissertation module. Or for instance, if you require access to a particular participant population which isn't available, you might need to revise your initial project ideas. So this flowchart can be really useful for helping you to develop your own project. The first thing to do is to read up on the literature around the topic you're interested in. This allows you to come to your first meeting with your dissertation supervisor feeling more prepared. Discuss your idea with your supervisor and do take on board their feedback. A key issue is whether you are able to gain access to the right participant population. Your supervisor might not be able to put you in touch with any reliable sources or contacts for your proposed population, which then means it's down to you to gain access to the right population. At this point, if you don't already have well-established, tried and tested contacts that you've worked with previously, it's unlikely you are going to develop and establish such contacts in time to get your dissertation done, particularly for your undergrad dissertation, which in reality can be about 7 months because it's often between October, the start of October, and the very end of April. So not very long at all. In the majority of cases, undergraduate dissertation projects involve participants who are also undergraduate students, and there's nothing wrong in this. There's nothing wrong in using this sort of population. It's great if you can get something, a different type of population, but if all you're able to access is the undergraduate student population, then this is fine as long as you can answer those research questions. So the next key issue to consider is, will the project require ethics above the standard departmental research ethics process for dissertation projects? There is always the exception to the rule here, but the general advice is not to undertake a project that requires enhanced ethical approval processes. In the majority of cases, it's not possible to do this anyway. A student can't apply for institutional ethical approval. We have our own departmental ethics processes set up to handle dissertation projects. It would have to be your supervisor who submits the ethics application. And this takes time. If your supervisor has already gone down the route and obtained appropriate ethical approval for the project you are undertaking, then this is great, this is fine. But these are normally organised months in advance. So you'd have probably had to be quite far along the dissertation process before embarking upon that. So this advice is given because the amount of time required to go through the ethics process. And there's no guarantee that you will get the approval in time to complete your project anyway. So it's a step that's best avoided. The next issue to consider is whether the project can be completed within the time frame available. This comes back to the feasibility of the project. With very limited time to complete the project from start to finish, you should be sticking to something that is not overly ambitious. You should integrate as well other measures into your study that will not be affected should further lockdown be introduced. And these additional measures may be used to supplement the data that you're collecting, which are sufficient by themselves for the dissertation. So you need to think about how your project can be adapted to withstand any further lockdowns. This is really beneficial to you should it happen, however unlikely it might be to occur again. We need to think about it again. Okay. Finally, you must discuss the finer details of the project with your supervisor and begin your ethics application as soon as you can. So that's it. What makes a good dissertation project and some advice on how you can get started. Thanks for listening.